after me. I'm a man. I'm 40.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Moving the Goalpost. I'm Nick DiMartino.
I'm Liam Barwick.
All right, so we are all over social media. You can follow us at MTGP ETB. Follow the show at MTGP ETB on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You could follow the Empty the Bench Network on at ETB Network also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can follow the show and the network, youtube.com/ETB network. And you can find all the Empty the Bench podcasts on etbpodcast.com. You could listen to this show or any other Empty the Bench podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to like and subscribe. And of course, we are presented by Wolf Spreads. Are you looking to get involved in the action while rooting for your favorite team? Have you ever had a friendly debate on who can pick more games correctly? Does all this talk about parlays, lines, and over-unders make your head spin and you want to learn more about the sports betting hoopla? Gamble with us and come check out Wolf Spreads. All NFL season, we've been running a sports betting competition completely free on the Wolf Spreads app. Here's how it works. Everybody gets 2,000 fantasy dollars. That's fake money to bet on the action. Whoever can profit most with their $2,000 bankroll wins. And if you're not an NFL fan, don't worry. Wolf Spreads has competitions available for the NBA, MLB, NHL, and college football and basketball. Put fantasy dollars on the over-under, the money line, or the spreads, competing for bragging rights with your fellow players while having additional fun watching sports and not risk losing your house in the process. Wolf Spreads, sports betting for friends who love the action. Okay, I think that's everything. So, obviously, this week is very big for the NFL, big week in NFL free agency. In case you've been living underneath a rock, Russell Wilson went to the Steelers signed Russell Wilson in free agency to a 1-year veterans minimum deal, which is what, 1.2 million, I think, or I'm sorry, or 1.2 million. Okay, so that's very low by veteran quarterback standards. I think it reminds me a little bit of when the Broncos signed him. The only difference is it's smart this time and wasn't so smart when the Broncos did it because the Steelers aren't paying him a shitload of money or trading away their whole future for him. So I say I don't think there's much debate that this is a good move, and they kind of had to do it given that they're in a very tough division.
Yeah, I guess. I don't really think that it moves the needle that much. I mean, he didn't have a great season. He hasn't had a great 2 seasons in Denver. I think, obviously, like the Steelers have quarterback issues, and that's one of their main problems. But I don't know that this really moves the needle that much, bringing in a guy for 1 year. And I mean, their division is tough, but there's one team that's, I would say, much better than the rest of the division.
The Browns
and the Ravens.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, I don't. To me, this doesn't really move the needle that much. I don't know what you think, but I mean, 1 year to bring in Russell Wilson. I know it's a veteran's minimum, so it's not like a big contract. But if he has a bad year, then you're sort of right back in the same place where you were at the start of this year, right?
Well, you are, but you're not really giving up anything. I mean, that's the downside, which is not really that big of a deal. There's very minimal downside to this deal, which is why they did it. And you are right. I don't know. I don't agree that I don't entirely agree. I don't think yes, it is possible that this doesn't move the needle very much, but you have to remember the Steelers, there's a very good chance that they will be a team kind of on the bubble. And the difference between Russell Wilson and Kenny Pickett, or even a Kenny Pickett learning under Russell Wilson, could be that difference. And given that they're in a very tough division, I mean, the Bengals and Ravens are probably, or even the Browns, if assuming all three of those teams are healthy, seem to be head and shoulders above the Steelers. But the Steelers aren't like a really awful team. They're kind of a bubble team. They could, if things go right, they could be a playoff team. Having Russell Wilson, or even like I said, a Kenny Pickett that learns under Russell Wilson versus a Kenny Pickett that doesn't learn under Russell Wilson could make a big difference. Like, I mean, I don't think anybody's arguing that this is similar to Aaron Rodgers getting signed by the Jets. It's not like that, but I mean, I think that could be for teams that are on the bubble. This could be a pretty big move.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we thought the same thing though going into when Russell Wilson went to Denver. I think that we thought a similar thing, and
yes,
I just don't love I just don't love the Steelers team. And I think they, like you said, they have a tough division, a tougher conference. I agree maybe that this is a good move in terms of mentoring Kenny Pickett, even though I think that the Kenny Pickett experiment is over. But I think that in terms of mentoring him, it's a better move but I don't think this is a signing that really moves them to me in any more. I wouldn't favor them by much more to win the Super Bowl than I did. I wouldn't give them much better odds to win the Super Bowl than I did before they made the signing.
Well, I mean, look, the mentorship thing is a pretty minor thing, but I mean, I will say, even though Russell Wilson really isn't that good anymore, I do think having a veteran quarterback with a history of success is an underrated thing. And even when they're very bad, like we talked about Peyton Manning winning a Super Bowl when he was limping. He limped his way through a Super Bowl. Like, he was that bad. He was benched for Brock Osweiler. He is possibly the worst quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl, at least in our lifetimes, likely. But having that experience is still could still make a very big difference for a lot of teams, especially for bubble teams. I mean, the reason I like this move is not because I think it makes the Steelers Super Bowl contenders, but because there's very little downside. I mean, so it's a 1 year's veteran minimum deal. It's not like when the Broncos traded away their whole future. I mean, you have to remember, Russell Wilson's reputation now is so much different than when the Broncos signed him. You have to remember, when the Broncos signed Russell Wilson, the entire sports world thought that they would be maybe a notch below the Chiefs. And the odds probably weren't all that bad. And everybody thought the AFC East was going to be some type of powerhouse. I mean, obviously, the attitudes towards Russell Wilson are just so different now. Now, like when the Steelers are signing him, like the Steelers are not trading away their future. They're just like, okay, this is a serviceable quarterback that might give us a little bit of a chance, which is not an uncommon thing. And honestly, not really all that bad of an idea if you think about it. I mean, now, the Broncos were historically bad 2 years ago. Last year, they were a little bit better, and they really went through a stretch where they were probably an above-average team. I get that's not enough for what they paid for Russell Wilson, obviously, but it is but it is something. I think it is something that the Steelers were able to do. That the Steelers were able to make the signing, because look, they're probably not going to be as good as the Bengals or the Ravens. I don't think anybody's really going to doubt that. The Browns, I mean, Deshaun Watson is a bit of a wild card and gets injured often. We don't know what exactly he's going to give the Browns. So given that particular position in a very tough division in the harder of the two conferences. I just can't fault them. Like, I have to say, I'm not saying it's an A+ brilliant move that will change the trajectory of their franchise for years, but I just can't blame. I just think it's a good move.
Yeah, I agree that they're in a better position now than they were before it happened.
But like, I mean, look, on paper, it doesn't move the needle that much, but you never know. I mean, it could be, you never know in the future what's going to happen, because it can be very small differences between a playoff team and a non-playoff team. So we just, it could be more meaningful than you think it is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
yeah. I also want to talk a little bit about Saquon Barkley going to the Eagles. A lot of Giant fans are big mad about this. I can't get mad at Saquon Barkley for going to the Eagles. They were willing to offer him a contract. The Giants didn't franchise tag him because they knew he wasn't worth it. So you obviously can't get mad at him for going to a different team who's going to pay him more money. And he's going to be on a better team. I understand it's painful for Giant fans, but I mean, I don't know. I'm not one to get to rag on athletes for not being loyal enough when teams are rarely ever loyal to them. And the few times that that teams are loyal to athletes, it's not exactly a good decision. I mean, the Giants and Eli comes to mind, or the Lakers and Kobe possibly comes to mind. And it's not always the best. It's not always the best team decision. And yeah, I'm not only going to hold that standard to athletes and not hold it to the teams, when the Giants were the ones, if anything, who were disloyal to him first. Now, obviously, Giant fans, like I said, aren't going to like it, but it's not really his job to care about what Giant fans think when it comes to his own career. I think this could be, look, it's going to suck if you're a Giant fan. I get that. It's going to suck. But obviously, this was going to happen. Low key, I sort of think that Daniel Jones having a good year 2 years ago could have been like the worst thing to happen to the Giants. They would have been better off in terms for their future if they just were not a playoff team or just a very bad team in the 2022 season.
Well, first of all, I don't understand how Daniel Jones had a good year 2 years ago. He threw 16 touchdowns. He didn't have a good year. He had
All
a
right,
better year.
You get my point.
People thought. But I think that this worked out for both sides. I think that as a Giant fan, I think that most of the fan base is very dumb and are just not in tune with anything, and are, as you know, they're the same people that are Yankee and Ranger fans, and so that makes sense. But this worked out for both parties. So for the Giants, were in no chance, no universe, going to pay Saquon Barkley what the Eagles paid him, and nor should they have. The Giants and Eagles are in two completely different stratospheres as to where the franchises are right now. It doesn't make any sense for the Giants to pay Saquon Barkley that kind of money, a running back who's injured a lot, when you're in a position where it looks like you're going to rebuild mostly the entire roster. That doesn't make any sense. And where the stupidity of Giant fans comes in is that they think that Saquon Barkley should have not taken an exorbitant amount more money and gone to a team that they consider a rival. I am not a Giant fan that has any kind of intense hatred or any hatred at all toward the Eagles. I don't think that they're that big of a rival, honestly. And I think that in the NFL, rivalries and pro sports in general, rivalries also are not like in college sports. They're not that big of a deal. But I don't understand how anyone could be mad at Saquon for taking more money, taking the money that he thought he earned, not really either not having to move house or not having to move far, being in the state that he played college football. I know that he said he likes New York and he really likes New York. Right. So it's not like he's like in, Phoenix, Arizona. Like, he could go to New York anytime he wants. He still lives very close. And to get the amount of money where you could still pretty much have the same life, you don't really have to move your family or move them far. I don't understand how anyone could be mad about that. And the Giants are in a position where they have a rebuilding roster. I don't think that I think that they had a season where I mean, some people said it was a good season. They made the playoffs by playing terrible teams, finishing 9-8, even though they started the season 6-2, playing the worst team they could have possibly drawn in the playoffs, the best team they could have drawn for them in the playoffs, in the Minnesota Vikings, who that year had, I think, 12 wins, and 11 of them were in one-score games, and they won every single one-score game. So they weren't as good as their record was. And then when they played a real team, the Philadelphia Eagles, they got beat 38-7. So this is, I don't understand how you're going to pay a running back that much money. But if you're going to be mad at somebody, if you're a Giant fan, if you really thought I want to keep Saquon no matter what, the fan base that you should, or the people that you should be mad at, is the Giants front office, not Saquon Barkley. Because again, the Giants, Saquon Barkley was open to a deal with them, but the Giants weren't open to the deal, and especially weren't open to that much money. I mean, if somebody, this is Saquon Barkley's life. This is not, a Madden game. If somebody works at UPS and FedEx is making $60,000 a year, and FedEx says, I'll give you $120,000 a year, is he going to not go because UPS and FedEx are rivals? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, obviously. No, I totally agree with everything you just said. And like I said, he's an athlete. He doesn't have any obligation to be loyal to the Giants, especially when he's been like, I think he wanted to stay. Like, I don't think it was his, it was exactly his preference to leave the Giants. I think his preference was to be a Giant for life. I think that's what he wanted. I think just the fact that it wouldn't have worked out. I mean, the truth is, no athlete is above leaving for the rival if they offer him more money. No athlete is above that. Some athletes end up like, Derek Jeter, for instance, was not above leaving the Yankees to play for the Red Sox. If the Yankees were in a terrible position as a team and they weren't willing to offer him enough money, which the Yankees usually is not a problem with the Yankees. But like, the point is that no athlete has to be loyal. I mean, no regular person has to be loyal to their employer. That's just a ridiculous concept. And Giant fans to Saquon Barkley are really just strangers. Like, why would he really change his life and turn down millions of dollars and play on a worse team to be loyal to the Giants? Like, as a fan, you have to try to at least look at this rationally from his point of view and try to put yourself in his position and say, okay, what would I do in this situation? It's not reasonable to hold him to that standard, especially when, like, you're not even willing to hold the team to that standard. I mean, they didn't franchise tag him. They didn't, like, if they really wanted him, they could have kept him. But obviously, it would have
given him a deal last year either.
Yeah, and you know what? It would have been stupid because it turns out that, like, Saquon Barkley on the Eagles can make a much bigger difference than he can on the Giants. I mean, if the Giants are not a good enough team that to the point where a star running back can actually make a difference, whereas the Eagles are a very good team, and their type of system that they run, having a star running back with kind of a running quarterback where they run a lot of, say, option plays, that's obviously going to make a vastly bigger difference, especially when the Cowboys, like, you do have an arch rival in the Cowboys who, and, the division next year can kind of go either way. Like, obviously, Saquon can make a much bigger difference for the Eagles than he could for the Giants. I mean, the Giants, they would be like that meme when they show that, like, house, that shack of a house with, like, a really nice car.
Right.
That's what it would be like with the Giants.
That's what they were. That's what they were.
That's exactly what they were.
I mean, you have to. I think that Giant fans also have to realize, to wake up and realize that there's only one way that things are going to change, honestly, because I think it doesn't matter who the coach is or who the GM is or anything like that. I think that it will not change until the Maras and the Tishes are gone, honestly. I mean, look at, like, what happened was in 2016, they decided to part ways with Tom Coughlin, even though Tom Coughlin had won 2 Super Bowls with them, which only one coach had ever done before in the history of the franchise. And before Coughlin, and even in the years they weren't winning Super Bowls, they were constantly competitive for a playoff spot or making the playoffs. They got rid of him. For some reason, they parted ways with him and not Eli Manning. even though you'd rather have an older coach than an older quarterback.
Or Jerry Reese.
Or Jerry Reese. And then they brought in Ben McAdoo. They did have a good season the next season, to be fair to them. They made the playoffs. But the Giants then, because of loyalty to Eli Manning, which is where another thing where I really get annoyed at Giants fans, I think they have an unwavering loyalty to and blindness when it comes to Eli Manning. I think that Eli Manning had 2 good playoff runs, but he was an average at maybe above, a little bit above average at his best quarterback for his tenure in New York. I don't think he was as good as Phil Simms was when he was the Giants' star quarterback winning Super Bowls. Anyway, they wanted to win Eli Manning another Super Bowl, so they went all in on this team after they went 11-6 instead of rebuilding, which they should have done. So they went into a state of constant rebuilding, not rebuilding, rebuilding, not rebuilding, and they did it again this recently, which is they still should have been rebuilding. They shouldn't have been blinded by the 9-8 season, which was a complete fallacy. And anybody who saw it could tell you that there was a lot of smoke and mirrors in their 9-8 season. And they gave Daniel Jones a contract, which they should not have done. And they gave Saquon Barkley a franchise tag, and they knew they would be in this position at the end of the year, and they were terrible. And frankly, it's annoying because what's going to happen is they're going to be terrible again next year. They're going to fire Brian Dable. Then the next coach is going to come in. They're not going to have a good season. They're going to fire Joe Shane, and they're going to be back where they are. The ownership is underrated how bad the ownership of the Giants is. It is horrific. And it shows you because the Jets have a bad ownership. You would agree too, right?
Well, I don't think any Jet fan thinks the Jets have good ownership.
Well, what it shows is that the stadium is a piece of shit. And it looks like a piece of shit outside it. And that shows you how bad the ownership of the 2 teams is. That it looks like a fucking Venetian 1-800 blinds window. The stadium is a piece of shit. And that shows you how bad the ownership is.
Yeah.
And one playoff game in 10 years with 2 fucking teams in the stadium.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. Both the ownerships are massive pieces of shit. I don't think anybody would doubt that. And the stadium could be a lot nicer.
He's only there because Mara is only there just like Steinbrenner because his father was an owner.
And Dolan. Yeah.
But Dolan at least recently has seen that I should pull back and let other people run the basketball operations and pull back.
Yeah, that's true.
What happened?
He at least had a little bit more humility than the Maras and the Tishes did, obviously. I totally agree. I think that Giant fans, I think that the psychology of Jet fans and Giant fans are different, even though they're in similar positions. Giant fans here's the thing. The Giants within the past 10 years or so have arguably been, or at least since the 2016 year where they made the playoffs, post Tom Coughlin, have been very similar to the Jets in terms of how bad they've been. The difference
that's not arguable. That's a fact.
Yeah, they are in fact in a similar position. The obvious difference is that they were able to make the playoffs twice, where the Jets haven't made the playoffs since we were going through this. Before I even knew you, is the last time the Jets made the playoffs. And so they were at least
just have a longer history of just not being as good
right.
Either.
Well, the other thing is, I think Giant fans and Jet fans are different in the sense that the Giant fans are less likely to accept that their franchise is a complete dumpster fire, whereas Jet fans openly admit it. Like, being a Jet fan is like having a chronic illness. We're all just sort of like, yeah, it's really bad, and maybe it'll get a little better next year, but probably not. I mean, Giant fans often have the delusion, largely because they lived to see 2 Super Bowls within the past 2 decades. So that's a part of it. It's also because Giant fans are disproportionately also, say, Yankee fans, and the Yankees are a much more winning franchise than the Mets, and Jet fans are disproportionately Met fans. So just in general, just as sports fans, they tend to be just different people. So I think that's why a lot of Giant fans, I think Giant fans wanted Eli Manning to be another Derek Jeter. Honestly, I think that it was a lot of the same people who are also Yankee fans, and they see Derek Jeter being on the Yankees his whole career, and that worked out well. It's obviously just a different sport, though. It's different when you talk about a quarterback as opposed to, say, a baseball player who one baseball player. I mean, if Derek Jeter has a bad year, which not to mention you can't even compare Eli Manning as a football player to Derek Jeter as a baseball player, just even that. But I mean, if Derek Jeter hits, say, 210, that's not gonna tank the Yankees franchise for years. I think that Giant fans wanted to have that Derek Jeter and Eli Manning, but it was so delusional. And something tells me that the Giants front office I think they wanted to do what the fans wanted rather than what was the smart move.
Right. Well, but
the fans are not always who are the smartest.
Well, but the fan bases are similar. Like you said, they're the same people. Like the Yankees have a manager who, if a pitcher in 2003 he hit a home run in 2003, that if you watch the video of the home run, the guy threw one of the worst pitches in the history of baseball. It was a 10-mile-an-hour pitch that he hit a home run off. And he's been the manager of the Yankees for 8 years. The Yankees are still worried about, we won.
Hasn't been that long. Wow.
Championships in the 90s. The Yankees, and they've kept the general manager around, even though he's clearly awful at his job. But so the Yankees are a similar position, but also Yankee fans will call up and complain to the radio stations and stuff about how the team does, we aren't winning, stuff like this. And then the Yankees went out and did something which they should have done, which was they traded for one of the best players in baseball, and Yankee fans are up in arms about it. So I don't know what you want. Same thing with Giant fans. I don't know what you want. Do you want to win? Or do you want to keep Saquon Barkley and keep losing? Because you have to rebuild the roster, unfortunately, because they're bad at what they do. And they shouldn't have to rebuild the roster because they should have rebuilt the roster 7 years ago, honestly. And I mean, it was a mistake to get rid of Daniel Jones, to take Daniel Jones with the 6th pick. It was a mistake to give him the contract. And I think that they're just putting lipstick on a pig with Daniel Jones. I mean, he hasn't been that good. And the thing is, they keep giving excuses. Well, his offensive line is bad, all this stuff. A lot of quarterbacks have bad offensive lines.
You know who has a bad offensive line? 75% of the league.
Yeah. And also you have to, you have to rebuild the roster. And I see a lot of people oh, how many times are we going to draft a lineman? You have to do it until you get it right. I'm sorry, but you have to do it until you get it right. Yeah. You can't just say, well, we drafted offensive linemen and they didn't work out like Evan Neal, so we can't draft offensive linemen and bring them in. You have to do it until you get it right. I'm sorry. Same thing with the coach. Just because Dable had a year where he got a very favorable schedule doesn't mean that he was a great coach. I do think that Dable did a good job this year. Toward the end of the season, I thought the Giants could have really quit on the season and it would have been horrible. But I think that he did a good job at rallying them. But I don't think that just because you fired a coach 2 years ago and brought him in, that a lot of Giants fans will say, well, we can't just keep bringing in coaches. Well, you have to, because if you've made the wrong decision, you have to get rid of the coach. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter how many times you're going to do it.
Right. You don't just stick with a bad coach because you've done it a bunch of times and don't want to do it again. And by the way, drafting linemen is not a dumb decision. I mean, linemen are a dime a dozen good linemen, and it's not a bad move. You have to have having a good offensive line is very valuable, especially when the Giants' offensive line for years, maybe the past decade, has been very weak.
Right. I don't understand why the onus is from the fans is on a player and not the front office that did nothing to put anything around him for years. The Giants have had two of unreal, otherworldly talents in the last 6 years, and they got rid of both of them. So I don't understand why. Yes. So I don't understand why the onus is on the player. Oh, Saquon shouldn't go to the Eagles. He should stay with the Giants, even though they've done nothing to surround him. Frankly, that's why Aaron Rodgers left. They did nothing to help Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, no. And by the way, it was a similar thing with Aaron. It was a similar attitude towards Aaron Rodgers.
But
the difference is he didn't go to the Vikings.
Just the difference is that a quarterback can make a team good he can make a bad team good just by his ability, but a running back really can't.
Right, because a really bad team, they might be right. A really bad team is just going to be a really bad team with a good running back who puts up really good stats, but you're not really going to be winning games. And even a really great running back, if the team is bad, is not even going to affect the spread very much in most games. Maybe half a point or something. I mean, even that would so. But it's not just that; it's also the fact that even if Saquon had stayed, it's like, what would even be the point of that? So you feel good about it? You feel good about losing with Saquon as opposed to losing without Saquon? I mean, I don't understand that logic behind some Giant fans that we're seeing. I don't know if you saw the whole Tiki Barber, "you're dead to us" thing. Although I think he was kind of joking about that. I don't think he was really serious.
No, I don't think he was, because he's doubled down on it. First of all, Tiki. Okay, so what's worse, leaving a team that you have no affiliation to, when they haven't put anything around you, and going to a team 90 miles south, or leaving your wife when she's heavily pregnant? Which one is worse? Because that's what Tiki Barber did. Also, Tiki Barber left the Giants and said to the media, with Eli Manning, they'll never win the big one. Not only did they win the Super Bowl, but they won it the very next year that he said that.
Yeah.
But I just don't understand. Tiki Barber also played in a time period where players weren't getting paid as much as now. If the Dallas Cowboys or Philadelphia Eagles or Washington Redskins came to him and said, "We're going to give you $5 million more a year than you'll make at the Giants," he would have went. Anybody would have went. I'm sorry, but
yeah. Well, it's not just that, but it's it is so bizarre when you see these types of takes from former athletes, because it's easy for us to say, because we've never been in a professional athlete's position. The closest thing we could do would be employment, but it's not like nobody's approaching us and saying, "We're going to offer you this much more money to work here instead of there." But he's a professional athlete, so he knows, professional athletes hire agents for a reason. It's to get them the best possible deal. So he knows that, as somebody who was a professional athlete.
right.
I don't understand. I don't understand that.
If he makes, let's say, he makes $1 million a year, right? If tomorrow ESPN Radio came and said, "We want you for $2 million a year," you think he's going to be like, "Well, no, you're a rival of WFAN," or is he going to take double the pay?
No, he would take double the pay if ESPN Radio offered him the money. Luckily for him, or luckily for whoever, luckily for WFAN or whoever, ESPN Radio doesn't have the money to pay Tiki Barber or would be willing to pay him the money. So that's obviously not happening. But the point is, that's what he would do. Or let's say ESPN offered him more money to be on TV. You think that he wouldn't? You think that if ESPN had offered him to be on TV, for which I'm sure would be more money and also a lot less work than being on the radio, you don't think he would do it? Of course he would.
I mean, I think also we're forgetting the biggest aspect of this thing, which is that Saquon Barkley is, in my mind, he is the best running back in the NFL. He is the most talented running back. He is not on the field, though. That it doesn't do any good. The biggest portion of the Giants season last year, when they went from 1-2 to 1-6 or 7, he didn't play any of the games. He was out, and that's not necessarily his fault, but it just is adds to. If you hate the Eagles so much, I think that you should look at it as, listen, they overpaid for a running back who's on the older end of the spectrum for running backs and is hurt a lot. I think that you could look at it that way as well. I mean,
I don't agree with that part. I think it was a good move for the Eagles. I mean, I don't think they overpaid.
I'm not saying it wasn't, but I think that but also their odds were plus 1,600 to win the Super Bowl before they got Saquon, and after they got Saquon, their odds are plus 1,600.
Yeah, but also I think that Giant fans, I think you were saying to me the other day that the Giants-Eagles rivalry is like the Penn State-Ohio State rivalry. Mm-hmm. Eagles fans don't really think about the Giants as nearly as much as Giant fans hate the Eagles. And as a Giant fan, it's I think that you should also care about what the position, the future of your own team more than you care about hating the Eagles. Would it be better if your team ruined their whole future just to stick it to just so he doesn't go to the Eagles?
Right.
I will say I was sort of caught off guard because I thought he was going to go to the Texans because we kept hearing about that. And by the way, I'm a Met fan. I saw Zach Wheeler go to the Phillies, and I'm not mad at Zach Wheeler for going to the Phillies. We also saw Noah Syndergaard go to the Phillies, and Steven Matz was on the Phillies, and a whole lot of our exes, as I like to say, have gone to the Phillies. And the only people I really get mad at are the Mets for mismanaging the whole thing. Now, I don't get mad at our former pitchers for going to the rival. That would just be so stupid. Whereas if the Mets if the Mets weren't such a dysfunctional organization, they likely could have stayed on the Mets. But I'm just not going to get worked up over that.
Yeah, I agree.
By the way, Drew Lock, the Giants signed Drew Lock. That's how you know they're entering rebuilding mode.
Well, yeah, they lost Tyrod Taylor as well to the Jets.
Yeah,
he really doesn't have to move his house.
Yeah. He literally plays in the same stadium. Yeah, he does. Yeah, well, look, Tyrod Taylor was better than Daniel Jones. Now, a lot of people are talking about how often people are saying that the Giants had to sign Daniel Jones to that contract. I mean, the contract wasn't particularly terrible because it wasn't high risk because the Giants had an out. But you know what? They didn't have to do it.
Correct.
They didn't have to.
I agree. I agree. I also do think, though, like a lot of people who criticize the contract also don't know the part about the out that was put in there.
Right. No. Absolutely. People are like, you're giving Daniel Jones this much money, but I mean, he has an out. So it wasn't a terrible move. But the truth is, even though it wasn't that bad of a contract, in hindsight, it was still not the right decision.
Absolutely.
And the truth is, like I said before, if they looked at Daniel Jones realistically and not this fantasy of what they wanted him to be, they maybe wouldn't have made that move, and it would have been smarter. I mean, Giant fans wouldn't have been happy at the time, a lot of them, but I don't know. It still would have been the right move, and they didn't have to do anything. They don't have to do anything. I don't know. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Also, another big story: Derrick Henry to the Ravens. I think this could be. Now, would you agree with me that this is a needle mover?
Yes.
Okay.
But they did also release Odell Beckham, though.
True, but not as I think that this is bigger than having Odell.
This is a big. Well, like you said, it sort of fits into what you said about Saquon. I mean, about the Ravens having a running quarterback where they run a lot of plays that could be option plays, and now you have Derrick Henry, who's a great running back, really changes the game, especially because he's a different running back than Saquon Barkley is, because uses a lot more strength and physicality. He's
big enough to be a fullback.
Right, where Saquon uses a lot of speed and talent. Not that Derrick Henry isn't talented. And I also think something that we didn't mention in the Eagles thing, I also think that the Eagles have a lot of internal problems, not just on the field problems, where I think the Ravens are still in a very good position to win the Super Bowl, honestly. And you bring on Derrick Henry, and it changes a lot of stuff. And namely, if a lot of criticism is on Lamar Jackson, even though I don't agree with a lot of it, but that he's not good in big games and stuff like that. This takes a lot of pressure off him in a big game because he's got someone like Derrick Henry.
Right. No, I totally agree. And also, I mean, my thinking was, look, that division is tough. That could be the best division in football. I was thinking, I think this could be a really big difference. And what I think you have to remember is what was their problem against the Chiefs. Now, I know people say it was 17-10, and that sounds like a close game. If you watch the game, you would know the game wasn't close. It was not close. The Ravens got shellacked, kind of. And it was in their own stadium. That game was not close. But what was the biggest downfall for the Ravens that game? It was that they didn't run the ball. Lamar Jackson led the team in rushing.
Right.
I mean, in that game, that was their downfall. And Gus Edwards obviously does not compare to Derrick Henry in terms of his ability. Another thing is that you also have to look at it like, okay, what does this do with like the Bengals? Like, that's what I was thinking too. It's like people aren't talking about that. A healthy Bengals team has been has been a Super Bowl contender in recent years. Last year, the Bengals weren't healthy, but when they are healthy, when Joe Burrow is healthy, they are Super Bowl contenders. This is a division rival who just signed Derrick Henry, and not to mention the Bengals also just lost Joe Mixon. I think that it is underrated. It's been an underrated 48 hours or so for the Bengals, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the Bengals just have a massive question mark. I mean, you have a quarterback who is terrific, but is, I think, you have to put him in someone who has a bad history of injuries. And so I think that with the Bengals, I agree that they're a really good team. I just think that they have such a big question mark around them the whole season because of that injury history.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying, like, it just seems like the Ravens like sped ahead of the Bengals. Like the Bengals fell further behind this just from this move.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And by the way, not to mention the fact Derrick Henry is, I mean, considering that he's healthy, maybe Saquon would fit this description too if he was on the field more, but is like the most dominant running back. He really, like, I feel like Derrick Henry, very few running backs can actually have impacted the games when he was on the Titans, which was at best a mediocre team. Who was just in a terrible division. He made a world of a difference for the Titans. Like, we do. I agree. A mediocre team.
I agree.
Which is another reason this is such a great move. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about Aaron Rodgers, this Aaron Rodgers sideshow. So Aaron Rodgers was approached by RFK to be his vice president, to run with him as his vice president. This is a really big story. I mean, obviously it's a big story. It would be a little weird to see. It just sounds kind of crazy. Now, I will say none of this was ever like Aaron Rodgers' response to this was never like brought up at any point. I mean, him being approached doesn't mean he's actually not going to be on the Jets and be with RFK on his presidential campaign, which will not materialize, obviously. I mean, everybody knows he doesn't actually have a shot at winning. But I mean, like, my thought is, okay, he was approached. What was his response? Like, it's not exactly fair to make it sound like he's going to be away from the Jets just because RFK approached him. RFK may have gone into it knowing Aaron Rodgers was probably going to say no. I mean, I get approached to do things, go places all the time. Nothing to this importance. But if I can't do it, I can't do it. I just say no. Like, it just, I don't think this really means that much for the Jets.
Yeah, I agree. Also, there wasn't a report that he was asked to be the vice president. It was a report that he was on the short list of vice president candidates, which I think like 30 Republicans have been rumored on the short list for Trump's vice president candidate. It doesn't mean that he's approached every single one of the 30 and asked them or whatever.
So we don't even know. So even that is misleading.
I think my opinion is that this is a good move by Kennedy, who's I agree that he doesn't have a chance to win the election, but he has a very good chance to make a serious impact on the election. True. And I think that it's, if you, like, a lot of people, I think now, not us, because we're much more in tune to the news, but especially political news, but I think a lot of Americans didn't even know he was running, honestly. And now all the sports shows, including ours, are talking about it. And I think you have a lot of people who are Googling Kennedy's name. And I think that this was a good idea for his campaign. The other person he listed was Jesse Ventura, who is a former wrestler, but was also the governor of Minnesota for years. And he was the independent candidate for president in 2020. I thought this was a good idea. And also, I think that there's a lot of, I think it's interesting, like the media narratives around Rodgers are also very interesting. I mean, he's come out and debunked this story, or at least he says it's not true, about the Sandy Hook shooting, which the media has been running with for a while, even though in typical media fashion, even though they claim that it was said 10 years ago and they're just reporting it now. But I think that there's a lot of narrative around Aaron Rodgers that I think that Aaron Rodgers is a big subscriber to the idea that all publicity is good publicity and there's no such thing as bad publicity. I think he is a very big subscriber to that.
I think that I don't think any reasonable person can actually subscribe to the idea that all publicity is good publicity. I would argue, if anything, most publicity might be good publicity, but there's a whole lot of bad publicity, especially if you're a professional athlete. In fact, there's a whole lot of bad publicity as a professional athlete. This story was so odd to me because, so according to a CNN report, a reporter, he said that the Sandy Hook shooting didn't happen or they were all paid actors or something like that. My first thought was, why was this not reported when it actually happened? Why is it more newsworthy 11 years later than when it actually took place, which was when the shooting was a lot more recent? Like, that just is a little weird to me. Like, okay, if it's a big story, it was a big story then when Aaron Rodgers was if it was the face of the NFL. Why does it only matter now just because of this RFK news, which obviously I think is the reason, because that's the only reason that this would come out now, because he was allegedly on the short list of RFK vice presidential candidates. But like, that's the only reason I think that this is coming out. So there really is no proof that any of this was ever said. We don't know either way, which I mean, it is kind of weird that a private conversation like this from a reporter would just be leaked over a decade later. It's very bizarre.
Yeah, I agree.
Like it, like obviously it seems a bit meticulous.
I mean, also this is like there's people who believe in conspiracy theories, and some of them are. This is like and Rodgers definitely does, and this is like an over the top, a horrible conspiracy theory that's clearly not true, and you know that it's so over the top because Rodgers actually made a tweet about it a few hours ago, which he really doesn't do very often. And I think that he leans into some of the stuff he believes, which makes me believe that Rodgers is not a believer of this story.
Right. But also, it's like people often think that it's characteristic of him. I mean, first of all, okay, maybe a little bit, but this is way more out there than anything he's ever said publicly.
Correct.
I mean, he does personally, like, nothing. Aaron Rodgers never really did anything that bad. He was just sort of, not vaccinated and has some weird personal practices. Nothing really that terrible. But this is also just so much further. This is so much further than anything he's ever said publicly in terms of conspiracy theories. But also, it is not fair to him at all to say, well, he's said all of these other things, therefore he also said this and also must believe this, when that's obviously not fair at all. I mean, that would be like convicting somebody of a crime just because they have a history of X, Y, and Z, and convicting them of murder because they've also done all of these things. Obviously, just because he believes some conspiracies doesn't mean he believes every single conspiracy theory that's ever existed. I mean, I don't think anybody believes or disbelieves all conspiracy theories. I believe some conspiracy theories. I believe Michael Jordan was suspended for gambling. That doesn't mean I believe every other conspiracy theory.
Right. Correct.
Like, so that whole thing is just weird.
I agree.
And it's just a massive distraction for the Jets. And did you see the whole Sean Marash Geo thing?
No.
On Twitter?
I didn't.
Oh, well, Sean Marash sent out he did the whole thing of this is hold on a second. He tweeted out okay, so he responded to the Aaron Rodgers thing that said, "As a father, this is sickening," without ever even like trying to like, just accepting it as true. Like as opposed to like trying to like, trying to see if any of this is like just accepting it as true, basically. Probably because he's a Jet hater.
Yeah, correct.
or a Rodgers hater or whatever. I don't know. So I do want to talk a little bit about this Nick Saban NIL comments thing. We do have the video of it.
Things that I believed in for all these years, 50 years of coaching, no longer exist in college athletics. So it's always was about developing players. It was always about helping people be more successful in life. My wife even said to me, we'd have all the recruits over on Sunday with their parents for breakfast, and she would always meet with the mothers and talk about how she was going to help and impact their sons and how they would be well taken care of.
Yeah. So basically, he's saying that NIL is part of the reason that he retired. I don't know. I think might have more to do with the fact that he's in his 70s. But I don't know. I mean, the problem is I don't buy into this whole thing that like because of NIL money that it's not about developing players in any real way or that it takes away from everything else. That's ridiculous because coaches are paid exorbitant amounts of money too. And schools also get exorbitant amounts of money. So is it only an issue if athletes get some of it, actually are able to like profit in their own way? Like that just feels so silly. Why is it okay when coaches are the highest paid state employees in the state? Or why is it okay when when schools have or in conferences have deals with networks? I mean, a big part of the reason Notre Dame is not a part of a conference is their NBC deal. The whole conference realignment thing also has to do with money. So it is weird to just only nitpick at NIL money when it comes to athletes.
Yeah, I agree. It's easy. He's annoyed about kids worrying about the money while he makes $11 million a year to coach them. I think that I disagree with you. I think that this is 100% the reason that he retired, and the reason that he retired was he can't dominate like he could. And one of the things he said was, it's the first thing kids ask about, and one of the only things kids ask about when they're on recruiting trips and stuff. Well, I've never gone into a job, and not worried about what the pay was and not considered that in taking a job or, in weighing other jobs. And it's the same thing. Like, I think that, but I don't think that it's much of a difference because if someone was applying to Alabama and one of their main things was, before the NIL, and one of their main issues was how are the facilities at Alabama versus UAB, where I could also go. Well, the reason that Alabama's facilities are so much better is because Alabama has a lot more money than UAB. Right. So it's always had to do with money. It's just now they're worried about what more money can I take. And also you have to think about things. I mean, you have to think about that 99% of the players are not going to make the NFL. So of course you're going to think about, I can make a certain amount of money in NIL deals going to Alabama, or I can make more going to Utah, just an example. But I think that I think that you'd be crazy not to consider that when you're weighing schools, honestly.
Right. It's also something where, like I said before, it's a standard you will apply to others that you will never apply to yourself. I mean, that would essentially be like me saying, well, because Nick Saban gets paid a lot of money, that means he doesn't care about developing players. Like, isn't that the same type of thing where if you care about money, that means the money is the only thing that matters? I mean, only in college sports is amateurism something that is like a desired quality. Only when it comes to college sports is that a thing. And we don't even have that for the Olympics. We allow not only do we allow professional athletes to play in the Olympics, but even if you are an amateur athlete, you still make millions of dollars off of endorsements if you're good enough. So it's only in this context where society ever even has that type of attitude. It's like, well, especially when a lot of football players don't come from a lot of money. And obviously, but even if you do come from a lot of money, that's always going to be a concern. And it is just but also it's like, I think that they were making the point of bringing him forward and like speaking about this to like argue against NIL. Like, I'm sorry, but just because Nick Saban doesn't like it and in his opinion thinks that, you know, it's bad for the sport, that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. That doesn't mean that it's a bad policy just because Nick Saban doesn't like it and has his opinions on it. It doesn't really matter that he's the best college football coach of all time. Like, I don't really think it makes the point that they think it does.
Yeah, I think that this is just, I think it also gets weighed, you know, with regular people going into college. I think, you know, oh, I could get a scholarship for this much going to Alabama, or I could get this scholarship. Like, I think this is just, he's just annoyed because he can't dominate like he used to be able to.
Yeah, I think it's been bad for, or possibly been bad for his dominance as a college football coach, because there's other I do personally think NIL probably didn't help him be as dominant as he once was. It's also just hard to dominate in the sport for really long periods of time. I don't know. So I do want to talk about this thing. Kobe, you see Kobe's statue that they put out at the crypto arena?
I didn't.
Do you know what and there was a bunch of spelling errors.
Really?
There were a bunch of spelling errors so basically they had, on this statue, it was to commemorate his 81-point game. And they had the roster of all of the players that were on the team. Oh, was it on the team or just on the Lakers at the time, right? Okay, so on the Lakers at the time, they had a list of all the players that were on the roster. And they misspelled the word decision when they said did not play coach's decision. They spelled it, instead of ending it with S-I-O-N, they ended it in C-I-O-N. I don't know how you do that. They also even misspelled players' names. They misspelled Von Wafer. They did an M instead of an N. They spelled his name Vom Wafer. And Jose Calderon, they spelled his name as Calderson. Like, that's how I am actually floored that this would happen, because it's not even like you're trying to like finish a homework assignment in time for like a deadline. Like, it has to be done by this time. This is a statue. Like, it's not like it has to be put out there at a certain time. That is so embarrassing. How do you do that?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's a lot of like statue unveilings. I feel like you hear just so many statue unveilings just always go wrong. But yeah, I agree. Shouldn't you? I mean, you need to double, triple check. Even if you have it completely right, you need to double, triple check everything. I assume. What are they going to do with it? Are they going to send it like back?
I don't know. Apparently, they're going to correct it. I don't know how you correct something that's engraved on a statue, though. They must have to destroy that particular statue.
Well,
okay, they are fixing it. They are apparently fixing it immediately. How do you do that? It's all engraved.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they get rid of the base of it and they'll probably keep the sculpture and get rid of the base. But yeah, I always find like these statue stories always more than not end up like in bad than in good. And I think that I find that amazing, because you would think that you'd have to be very like precise with everything and things like that, especially with something as little as spelling.
Yeah, I mean, Calderon, like if we put up these banners and we have the wrong spelling, we fix it immediately. Like,
right.
And you know, that's not a statue. Like, it's not even close to as important as what you put on a statue. And but it wasn't just like one; it was like numerous spelling errors. So it is just very bizarre. Yeah, the Lakers said that they were working to correct the mistakes. We have been aware of this for a few weeks and are already working to get it corrected soon. The team said in a statement obtained by the Associated Press. How long has this been up? I don't know. Do you know how long it's been up?
No.
Because if it's been up for 2 weeks, they said they'd been aware of it for 2 weeks. Has it really been up for 2 weeks with incorrect spelling? I don't know. That's that sounds a little odd to me if that were the case. Yeah, I guess it is a little. I would say it is a little bit nostalgic to talk about Jose Calderon again.
Yes,
as Knick fans. Yeah, that honestly sounds a little bit like something the Mets or the Jets would do, or the Knicks, maybe. So I don't know, a little weird stuff. Kind of embarrassing. So what was this story? You see this Aroldis Chapman video?
No.
So this was we have the video. So he posted that on social media. He posted that on Twitter on his Instagram story, I think, and it's been going viral. I don't know if you heard about this.
No, who was that he was with?
I think that might have been his mother, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, yeah, that is weird if it was his mother, definitely.
Reportedly his mother.
It was weird that it was his mother, especially if he posted it himself.
Yeah, he posted it himself.
Yeah, that makes it weird, even weirder than it already is, I guess.
Yeah, on his Instagram story.
Is he still on the Yankees?
No, he's on the Pirates.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's a very strange video, no question about it.
Well, at least it didn't involve domestic violence, which has also happened with Aroldis Chapman in the past.
Yeah,
not a video, but like in the news.
I think he shot his wife, right?
No, he didn't shoot his wife. I think it was like a choke or something like that. Well, he's used to choking in big games, so he's just trying to spread the love.
Yeah, I just remember him from the Yankees. He was always like, I think he was always like loading the bases every outing or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's although he was actually on the Cubs and the Cubs won the World Series, but he almost blew that game, if you remember.
Yeah, I think the Indians had a couple of people on it at the end, right?
Yeah. So Jason Mackey, the Pirates beat writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, reported that the woman in the video is his mom. It was an innocent family moment where they joked Aroldis was a mommy's boy and she couldn't wean him from breastfeeding. In the video, he's seen acting like an infant. All right, that is a bit of an odd thing. So another thing I want to talk about is Djokovic lost at Indian Wells to a player who was ranked in like the hundreds.
Yeah, he only had 4 wins in his whole career, which Djokovic has over 1,600 wins in his whole career. I think that I think this was interesting. It felt like a game where a lot of money changed. Some money changed hands. I mean, but this was. I mean, Indian Wells is the closest thing to a Grand Slam without being a Grand Slam.
Right.
I think that this was a crazy loss. I mean, Djokovic has been really good this year. He's either won a Grand Slam or gotten to the finals. And I thought this was insane. I mean, the one thing is it's only 3 sets. So he can only lose 2 sets to 1. But you lose to someone who has 4 wins and you're 1,600 wins and you would argue the greatest player of all time.
His name is Luca Nardi.
Yeah, you would argue he's the greatest player of all time.
He is.
Djokovic. So this was wild. I mean, this is one of the biggest upsets in the history of tennis odds-wise, especially in a major tournament like Indian Wells. Like I think maybe you see it sometimes in the smaller tournaments, but this is the biggest of the smaller tournaments. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, who like the question is going to be like once Djokovic leaves, like it's going to create a vacuum. I don't know who the next number 1 is really going to be.
Probably Alcaraz
or Medvedev.
Yeah, maybe Medvedev. Right now, it probably Alcaraz. It looks like. Well, there's a lot of really good young players right now.
Yeah, Tsitsipas is really good.
Honestly, I think Djokovic has a lot left. Like, I don't think he's gonna.
No, I agree. He won 3 out of 4 Grand Slams and got to the final in the 4th one.
Well, he didn't get to the final in the Australian Open this year.
But the last tour, the last Grand Slam cycle.
Last year. Yeah.
Yeah, he won 3 and got to the final in the one that he lost.
Correct.
So yeah, I agree. He definitely probably has a lot left, and especially he's fighting like the women's tennis game is there's a ton of parity. Like
Yeah, there's a lot more
the
parity.
women's
It's also
have a
it's
lot,
also a lot less entertaining than the men's game.
right, but there is a lot of sort of chalk in the men's tennis where it's like
Right.
Djokovic is going to get there, Medvedev is going to get there probably in the semifinals, and the top four normally in the semifinals. But
Yeah.
so this is shocking to see it in the men's game.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of top players in the future we haven't even heard of yet.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just saying that I think that the good thing about when Djokovic leaves is you're not going to have as much just dominance. I think it's going to be a lot more different.
Yeah. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about Duke versus UNC.
Yeah.
So UNC is 2-0 against Duke this year.
Yeah, and there was so much stuff in this game. You had Kyle Filipowski with the trip in the first half of the game.
Yeah, he thinks he's
with
Grayson Allen.
With the leg that you thought was going to be amputated after the Wake Forest game. Then you had John Shire going into the Cameron Crazies and apologizing to the senior students. And then the UNC players waving to the Cameron Crazies as they threw stuff onto the court at the end of the game. A lot of that to mask the fact that UNC completely dominated Duke in this game. It wasn't even close. It only felt close when it got to like 7 or 8. It never was really close. And I think that Duke is a team that I think is on the list of teams that could go down in the first round if you watch Duke's play versus North Carolina, who I think are in a good position. I think North Carolina right now have a team that can make the Final Four. And I think that was evident. I mean, North Carolina killed Duke at Duke. I mean, that doesn't happen often where the road team, where any team really dominates in this game. Normally it's a very close game, but the road team and a team that was an underdog, 5.5 point underdog going into the game, they dominated Duke.
Yeah. I mean, I think Duke's gone a little bit more downhill ever since Coach K left, obviously.
Even though John Shire is as hateable as Coach K. I mean, going into the
but he's not as good as Coach K.
Right, but going into the senior students and apologizing is ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's so folksy. Like Coach K did the same thing when he lost. By the way, I don't know how you can still like in my mind, I don't know how a Duke fan can really have a lot to say in this rivalry, because in my mind, like the biggest win in the whole history of the rivalry is UNC beat Duke in the Final Four to end Coach K's career. Like, I just think no matter how many times Duke would be able to beat UNC would always have that.
Yeah.
It'll never go away. But I think North Carolina are in a good position, and I think that we're going to have a March now with a lot of parity, because I think that UConn, it's tough for a team to win back-to-back, especially in college. It really doesn't happen that often. And I think UConn, even though they are the most talented team, I think that I don't think they're going to win just because it is that tough to repeat. And I think you've got a lot of teams that are in the running of teams that could make it, and North Carolina is one of them.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think they are. I mean, we're already. I mean, next week is going to be the day that everybody sits around on their asses and watches college basketball all day. It's one of the few days of the year that I can actually sit on my ass and do nothing except watch college basketball and not feel bad about it.
Right, exactly. And at work and everything. But I'm excited for the tournament. I really do think it's going to be a tournament with a lot of parity. I mean, last year, obviously, you had San Diego State, Florida Atlantic in the Final Four. I mean, so you had like a San Diego State was in the championship game. So you had a wild NCAA tournament. And I think that we're lined up for another one. And I think that it looks like there's going to be a lot of parity. And I think that there's still a lot of question marks heading into Sunday as well. Yeah. Of who's going to be one, who's going to get there and all that.
Yeah. All right. So we'll be back. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back next week. A lot of college basketball talk. We'll be picking the games in the NCAA tournament. All right. So see you next week. Peace out, everybody.